Well, our gospel lesson this morning finds the disciples enjoying some quiet time with Jesus. Normally, as they were traveling around with him, they were just as much as Jesus was, or almost as much as Jesus was, beset by the huge crowds that followed Jesus wherever he went. And it must have been rather tiring and exhausting and perhaps a little bit disconcerting to have to deal with those crowds all the time. And I'm sure that the disciples were grateful for a time just to spend in quiet with Jesus. Jesus also, I think, was thankful for this time because this was an opportunity for him to teach the disciples things that they needed to know. He had been noticing that he and the disciples were not on the same page on everything. For example, Jesus, as he does in our lesson, had several times tried to share with the disciples that where things were headed. He would say to them, I am heading towards Jerusalem, and there I will be betrayed, and I will be taken or be handed over to the religious and the political leaders, and I will be tried and killed. And whenever he would say this, or many times when he would say this, the disciples made it clear to Jesus that they didn't like what he was saying, and they didn't quite understand it. And Peter, for example, one time said after Jesus had told him this, he said, no, Lord, never let that be for you. And Jesus responded, get behind me, Satan. You are savoring the things of human beings and not of God. And so Jesus had noticed that they were not always on the same page with him. It's important for all of us who want to follow Jesus that we stay on the same page with him, isn't it? And how else do we do that but keeping ourselves in prayer and in reading of the scriptures and in fellowship with one another? And so Jesus was trying to provide some of that with these folks during this quiet time. It had been an up and down time. Lots of wonderful things had happened. There was I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from my airplane ride. I don't know about you all. Does that ever happen to you? But anyway, so I'm searching for words, and I asked for your prayers. But they had seen the transfiguration, and Jesus revealed to them in great glory and in sparkling brilliance. There were more miraculous healings where they saw Jesus do the impossible. There was the bright, shining moment when Peter boldly recognized Jesus as the Messiah. All kinds of great things. But on the other hand, there had been some perplexing, even disturbing moments that really showed how far they had to go, and where Jesus speaking more and more about his coming suffering and death, and them resisting that, and even having to be scolded, as we talked about before. And then in this journey towards Capernaum, Jesus must have overheard them arguing with each other about who was the greatest of the disciples. In fact, midway through our lesson, Jesus, you might say, busts the disciples for having a conversation about that very thing, about their ambition to be the greatest. And so as they're gathered there in the house during this quiet time, not long after arriving, Jesus asks them, what were you arguing about while we walked along the way? And the scriptures tell us that that question is met with silence. You ever had that experience where you're just busted, saying something about another person, and then you don't realize somebody else overheard it? And then they say, I can't believe you said that. And what do you say in that situation, right? And that's exactly the situation that the disciples were in. They had been found out, and they were embarrassed because they realized in that moment that they shouldn't have been talking the way that they were talking. Jesus knew they had been arguing with each other about who was the greatest disciple. And I'm going to guess that what made this situation even a little bit more embarrassing was the fact that when they were arguing about who was greatest, well, they weren't really nominating each other, if you understand what I'm saying. I mean, Peter wasn't saying, oh, you know, James should be the greatest. And James wasn't saying to Judas, you know, about Judas, oh, Judas, you should... No, they were all arguing for themselves as to why they should be the greatest, why they should have a plum position in Jesus' cabinet when Jesus took over running Jerusalem and Israel as they expected that he would. And that's when Jesus decides that he really needs to have a serious talk with them. Really needs to get them on the same page with them. Jesus recognizes that the disciples have been seeming to suffer short-term memory loss in terms of what some of the teachings that Jesus was trying to hammer into them, especially about his predictions of his suffering. And so he sits down, the Bible tells us. And you need to understand that sitting down meant that he was about to teach. That's what the rabbis would do when they were about to teach, right? And Jesus was a rabbi. And so they understood that when Jesus sat down, that they needed to come around and listen, because Jesus was about to lay down some truth. Jesus was about to give them something incredibly important. Jesus was about to tell them something that would be revolutionary, that would change their lives, and something that would be remembered long after he died and was resurrected. And so it's important for us also to listen when Jesus sits down. When Jesus sits down, what does he tell them? He begins with a simple but mind-blowing, revolutionary statement that I don't imagine very many other people had ever said anything like this before. He says, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and the servant of all. Think about that. Maybe we've heard that before, some of us. And because we've heard it, we don't really think about how revolutionary what he's saying. He said, if you want to strive for greatness, you need to redefine greatness according to my terms and not the world's terms. You need to understand that greatness is not about how many people bow down and take care of you and cater to you. Greatness is about who you bow down to and who you take care of and who you serve. It's not about being at the head of the line in that place of preference. It's being at the back of the line in the place alongside with those who are ignored and devalued. And then Jesus did something very characteristic. He decided he didn't want to just use words to give his message. He finds a child that is, for whatever reason, there in the house with them. And he brings the child over, and he takes the child in his arms. And here's what he says. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. This sounds kind of like an algebra problem. You know, A plus B equals C, right? So let's go over it again. He says, if you welcome the child, you welcome me. That's A and B, right? And then the C is, if you welcome me, you welcome the one who sent me. When you encounter this child, or such a child as this, you are encountering Jesus. And that depending on how you respond, that's how you're responding to Jesus and how you're responding to the one who sent him. Amen?
Amen.
Okay, you got it. A plus. I haven't thought about algebra in years, but there it comes. Now, it's interesting. We want to make sure that when we read this, we look at things through our contemporary glasses, right? You understand what I'm saying? I mean, I'm a child of the 21st, well, probably more than the 20th, but I'd like to think I'm a contemporary person. And that means that I have certain assumptions about the world that are a result of my being the product of my time, right? You might say that I have 21st century glasses that I put on. And when I look at things like in the Bible sometimes with 21st century glasses, I get a different, distorted idea of what that means. And we need to sometimes take off our 21st century glasses, because if I listen to this wearing my 21st century glasses, I'm tempted to say, oh, wasn't that sweet that Jesus took a child and embraced him and said, oh, you big, tough, brawny fishermen, you need to I know you've got a soft heart in there somewhere, and you need to open yourself up to these little children. And we'd be making it into something sentimental, because we love kids, right? Or at least we say we do. Talk to the kids who are separated from their parents at our border, you'll understand maybe we don't love our children as much as we think we do. But nonetheless, we say that children come first, right? And we put tremendous resources towards our children, and we some of us get our children on waiting lists for the right preschool, and I'm not saying you all do that, but there are people who do that. We think that we are, we see children as being really important, and so we turn it into something sentimental. But let me assure you, there is nothing sentimental about what Jesus did when he took that child. Because you have to understand that in Jesus' time and place, children were not that important. I don't know necessarily why that was the case. Perhaps it was because there was a high infant mortality rate, or that it was not at all unusual for a child to die before they became adults, and maybe they were less concerned about that than we are, because it was such a reality that they had to live in, and at the same time they had to see children. The way that they saw children was that they were basically servants. There was a similarity in the word for child in the Aramaic language and other languages with that word child and the word servant. And that the child wasn't really going to become valuable until they can become fully engaged in helping the family survive. Amen? Amen. That's the way that it was in those days. And that continued to be the case for a long time, and still is the case in some corners of the world today. But even in medieval times, for example, I came across a quote from Thomas Aquinas, who was a Christian theologian. But here's what he said about the priority of children. He said that in a raging fire, a husband was obliged to save his father first, then his mother, next his wife, and last of all, his young child. Now, I think most of us, if we saw that same dilemma, we would switch that around, right? We'd say, oh, the children, women and children first, right? Not in Jesus' time. Children were seen as a burden that they hoped would eventually become old enough to be an asset to the family. In other words, part of what Jesus was getting at is that here is a child that can do nothing for you, who cannot converse with you, cannot engage with you, cannot help you out, cannot help with the harvesting, if you do something for them, it's a losing game. They can't do anything back for you, right? Jesus is saying, you know, there are people in this world that the world dismisses as having no real value. Children happen to be included in that. But there were a whole lot of other people that were included in this list of folks who just weren't seen as all that important. And it would have included people who were divorced, people who had given birth to children out of wedlock, people who were in prison, people who were homeless, all sorts of different kind of folks who were seen as unnecessary and a drain, and who were ignored except when they were being bullied or abused in some way or another. And here was Jesus telling the disciples to honor and welcome all of these folks. Welcome the poor. Welcome the powerless. Give them honor. Make them at the top of your priority. And this command makes no sense in the world of the disciples. They're saying, Jesus, you want us to welcome someone who has no power to welcome us in return. There's no capacity for reciprocity. We might say no return on our investment. We can't believe you, Jesus. First, you tell us that all you want to talk about is suffering and dying instead of victory and glory. And now we have to welcome and even value small, insignificant, powerless people who can do nothing for us in return. What are you talking about, Jesus? Like I said, children in the culture that the disciples grew up weren't the only ones who were devalued. They shared space on the margins with all sorts of people. And so in this passage, children are just really a stand-in for all of those sorts of folks. And even though we might say on paper and in some respects we do have this as a reality that children's lot in life has improved, a lot of the people on that list still are seen as valueless, still seen as unimportant, still seen as nobodies. You know, sometimes people have tried to understand our culture and the way that we organize things together with a triangle, you know, just like this. And at the top of the triangle would be the few or the privileged and the powerful, and everything is geared towards them. And then down at the bottom are those folks that we were just talking about, the many, the masses of folks who are struggling and poor, and everything seems to be working against them. And the priority often is for the goodwill and the well-being of the powerful. Amen? I mean, you know, we have a tax system that, for example, really advantages the wealthy. And no wonder the middle class is disappearing and the gap is growing wider and wider. The system is intended to create that situation. And so the more and more, a few go up to the top and more sink down to the bottom. And what we need to understand is that when Jesus took that child up, and he says, if you welcome this one, he was really literally turning that triangle upside down. And saying, you know what, if you want to be great, you need to spend the time putting those people who are on the bottom up on the top. It's so amazing, really, when you think about it. It's actually sort of scandalous. Jesus says, you know, I don't mind you ranking people as long as you do it completely differently than the world does. You understand what I'm saying? Jesus is saying that it's all right for some people to be seen as more important than others, as long as those people who are seen as more important than others are the poor and the powerless and the vulnerable and the oppressed. Sounds pretty radical to me. there's a big debate that is going on, that has been going on for who knows how long. Some people say, oh, well, you know, it's all right and good that you would say those sorts of things. And of course, yes, Jesus is turning things upside down from the way we think and all of that. But, you know, that doesn't say that the government should be treating people that way, right? You've ever heard people say that? Say, well, you all as Christians, go ahead and do that. But don't expect the government to be based on these principles. Well, I'm not here to solve that argument. I am here to say, however, that as followers of Jesus Christ, we are called to have a different ethic in terms of how we understand the value and the dignity of human beings. And it shouldn't be surprising that that would be a different one. Do you think that God is impressed with the powerful and the rich? Do you think God caters to them in a way like we do? I don't think so. God is just simply saying, you know, there's no one that we can disregard. There's no one that we can disregard. As you know, I just came back from 2 weeks with Wendy and with our daughter Emily and our extended family down in Florida to join together in mourning my brother's loss, my brother Rick, my older brother. And it was a powerful time for all of us. And you know, you always wonder what other people, how they feel about somebody that you know really well. You know, I saw my brother at his best and his worst. He saw me also. But I was interesting and wonderful to hear so many people talk about how much they appreciated it. About 700 people came to his funeral service, it said. And they opened the floor and it went on for well over an hour of many people coming up front and talking about him. But out of all of the people that spoke, even my brothers and others very close to Rick, the one that I most remember was a guy named Otis. Let me tell you a little bit about Otis, because I've known Otis most of my life. He was one of my brother's oldest friends, way back when we were growing up in Chicago. And Otis had a tough life. He was really one of those nobodies. He was part of a group of young people who were shipped from other towns, bused into the school that I went to. And the reason they were all bused was that our school was the local hub for providing special education for folks in our surrounding area. In other words, these were folks who we would have called them back in those days that they were retarded, right? Now we have better names for developmentally disabled or intellectually challenged, but in those days, Otis was a retard. And for that, he was teased and bullied mercilessly over and over again. And then to top it all off, Otis was the only black kid in our school that was located in a town that had a horrible legacy of racism that still persists even to this day. And I had friends, well, classmates I'll call them, who regularly used the N-word and any other kind of thing that they could to just in passing, but especially as it related to Otis. And so Otis had the double whammy of being a black kid in an all-white school and also being, as they would have said, a retard. He was nobody. The only time anybody ever paid attention to Otis was when they were heaping abuse upon him. Everybody except for one person, my brother Rick. And Rick stuck with Otis, and they are still friends. We're still friends today. And Otis, I don't know how he scraped up the money. He's not a rich person by any means. He's always struggled. I don't know how he got the money to come from Chicago to Florida for for the funeral. But when he stood up to speak, he said, something like this. He didn't have anything written down. I wish I could give it word for word, but I'll do my best. He said, when I was a kid, and he could hardly get this out because the memories were so painful. He said, I was nobody. No one gave me the time of day except to tell me that I was a retard and that I was the N-word. But Rick, he took me to his side and we became friends, and I love Rick. And then he began to break down again. He said, "You just don't know. You just don't know. You just don't know what it meant to me, what it means." Y'all didn't have a chance to ever know my brother Rick. You probably will never meet Otis, although who knows, maybe he'll come visit us sometime. You won't know, and neither will I, many of the other people that you befriended, because Otis was one of many. So many of the people who spoke said Rick was a friend to the friendless. You don't know Rick, but I hope you will join me in committing to honoring Jesus the way Rick honored Jesus. Because there's all kinds of people all around us. Some of them don't look, they look maybe like they got their act together. But maybe they don't. We got people all around us who feel like they're the last. Feel like that nobody really cares about them, that they really don't matter. And Jesus says, you know what? If you encounter one of those folks and you welcome them and you embrace them and you put them at the top of your pyramid, your triangle, and honor them, guess what? You're doing it to Jesus. If you want to be great, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be great. We just have to redefine what greatness means. If you want to be great, go to the last place and hang out with people there and meet Jesus in a way you've never met him.